Welcome everyone to Temi Tension's Podium. My name is Temiloluwa Ogundele and I'm excited to be your host for today. Today I'll be guiding you through this episode with different inspirational thoughts, experiences, and wealth of knowledge. Joining me today is an amazing personality, an expert in tech, a tech consultant at EY at that, well-versed, versatile, well-traveled, an amazing person. His name is Nzube Nwaokoro. Nzube will be talking us through, his opinion about cybersecurity levy in Nigeria, as well as, cyber attacks on banks or financial institutions. Nzube will be sharing us his unique perspective and also what he thinks about the current situation in Nigeria. Without further ado, just relax, sit down, crank up your volume, and let's get it started. Hi, Nzube.
Hi, Temi.
It's so good to have you here today.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure.
I know you work in the UK at the moment, but how can you share, what's your personal experiences, working in the UK and working in Nigeria as a tech consultant?
I think it's been interesting, right? Because it's two very different market contexts. Like I always say this, in 2020 when I moved to the UK, the conversation was you're moving from a Nigerian market where financial inclusion is the direct opposite of what it is in the UK. So you have a larger unbanked population in Nigeria, 60% unbanked or some ridiculous stats as such. And you come to the UK where there's higher financial literacy levels and it's 90% banked. So it's a very different context. Global financial problems are still the same. You're solving access to, digital channels, products and all that, but it's a very different context, which you have to adapt to and understand nuanced ways with which you solve the problems of clients.
So would you say you prefer working in Nigeria than in the UK?
Nigeria's home, right? So there's always the sentiment to want to work there and solve problems because it's closer to your locality and all that. But the challenges in the UK are also very nuanced. They're also a bit more global because now you're working with global tier 1 banks.
Okay.
In Nigeria, it was the tier 1 banks in Nigeria as well, which was also big. But here it's the bigger boys.
It's quite interesting because I felt like, the policies in Nigeria are a bit porous and do not really create some level of financial institution inclusion rather in banks. Considering a lot of policies that the new regime, the President Tinubu has just put in place, I feel like it's a bit too watertight. Because in my opinion, it doesn't bring about so much financial inclusion for customers and, patronizers of our financial organizations. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. I think it's reminiscent of the fact that the market is maturing. We used to say it's underdeveloped, and I think the lingua these days say it's maturing because underdeveloping just sounds very wrong. And part of that is, nascent policies. In my opinion, I think the policies are not usually well thought out because there's a degree of introspection that you want to happen to policies, how they're thought through, how they're implemented. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we get that level of depth in how policies are thought through in Nigeria, which is it's just evident of the fact that the system is nascent. So it's maturing.
If you were to be the president at the moment, what policy do you think the Nigerian sector need from the tech perspective?
First of all, the focus has to be away from taking from the system and giving. So a lot of the policies have been more taken away. So it's levies, it's taxes, it's VATs across all the consumer sectors. It's your electricity bills going out of the roof. It's people paying more for consumer products. It's now the cybersecurity levy, for example, which would impose some ridiculous 0.5% on transactions. You'd rather prefer policies that stimulate the economy, that in one way or the other, provide relief funding, tax breaks, all the sort of stimulus, as opposed to taking from people because people don't have so much.
Yeah, I think talking to you now, you really, really sound like a pro-Renault or mockery and an anti-Showering. I'll say this because Renault, some couple of days back on Twitter, tweeted and it was like, this policy is a very good bit to, ensure that cyber attacks is reduced in Nigeria, and also to stabilize the currency to a reasonable extent. What do you think about that? Because you begin to sound like, you're in support of the cybersecurity levy policy. What do you think?
I mean, I think there's some good in strengthening the cybersecurity infrastructure of the nation, in which we will get to at some point in this conversation. There are lots of gaps in it, right? But again, what we can probe is the approach that the government is using, right? So you can't say that you're trying to achieve a good, and in achieving that good, you cause a lot of harm, right? Which is why, for example, the Labour Congress and a lot of trade unions are going to protest very soon against the levy. Exactly. Right, so you can't say that you want to stabilize Naira as a principled objective, and then make the people who use the Naira suffer for it. And that's the double jeopardy that has, in my opinion, has been very present in President Tinubu's policy. I'm not particularly a fan of him, and I'm also not big on like name chasing like Greno or Sure. Like I think a lot of those guys are just name clout chasers, to be honest. If you want to discuss policy and principle justification for why policy should be and how they should be implemented, I think it's not done appropriately.
Wow. Okay, so at the beginning of this conversation, you said you left a market that has some level of financial inclusion. That's Nigeria.
Yeah.
And thinking about it now, I feel like most of this particular policy, I'm emphasizing this policy because Nigeria is going through a lot at the moment in terms of political stance, economic stance, and all that.
Yeah.
And every bit of policy that is passed in different quarters still fall in line with each other. It still has like the same impact on the citizens. Now, speaking about financial inclusion, I don't know if you think that this particular cybersecurity level would reduce financial inclusion. And while answering my question, I would like you to just elaborate a bit more on what the cybersecurity levy is about for my viewers, so they can, have an understanding of what we're talking about.
Okay, so I think the levy, in just very layman's understanding, is it imposes 0.5% additional levy off of the value of transactions, basically just wire transactions, right? So any transaction you made through digital channels, how like you pay 53 naira on interbank transfers, that standard levy, just being very basic, right? Yeah. So now just envision a new 0.5% on the value of transactions that are made. Now there are exemptions to the transactions that can be levied. So for example, your salary will be levied. If you're transferring between your personal bank accounts, it won't be levied. But a lot more of the transactions that happen outside of those exemptions would be additionally levied 0.5% of its worth. And I think it significantly negates the idea of inclusion. And here's a very simple way. Financial inclusion wants more people to be banked, right? So you want more people to have bank accounts. You want more people to use financial digital products like your mobile apps.
Exactly.
You use USSD and all that. Now these are the channels through which a lot of your digital transactions will happen. And that's the same channel where you want to impose the cybersecurity levy on. So basically what you're telling, that uneducated woman on the street who has been trying to start to use mobile apps is that now she'll be paying more for transactions. I mean, think about the woman who has high volumes of, in and outs, right? It means that now she's going to be paying a lot more. And there's also the angle of double counting. So if you send, to someone, and this is a very simple analogy on Twitter, I think, someone's like, on a 10 million naira transaction, you send that money to person A, that money gets a 0.5% levy on it. Now, if that person needs to settle like 5 other legs of transactions and send like 2 million to 5 other people, you get 5 other 0.5% levies on it.
Right.
And you can accumulate a ridiculous sum on just one transaction due to it. So it definitely disincentivizes people from wanting to use digital channels, because then people would rather want to just do cash transactions, which you can't levy.
I literally came across a tweet on Twitter, and this lady Dioha Rachel said, "Now to dig ground, hide my money. I can't continue like this. Let me reverse the old method."
Yeah.
So personally, I feel like if it gets to that stage, a lot of people will become jobless, because if Nigeria or the president at the moment is using this, in my opinion, as a propaganda to get more money or get more levy, what are they using these levies they are getting out of it to do?
Yeah.
Is it to build some cyber defense? Is it there? I mean, the customers need some level of reassurance, don't you think?
Oh, honestly, if you think about the interventions on financial inclusion, so the ways that the likes of OPay and Co entered the market, it was by simplifying the access to financial products, right? Making it as simple as possible with star 2x whatever hash, you can transfer money, helping people on the streets open bank accounts in the easiest possible way with the least possible charges. That levy goes in contravention with all of those efforts. And it's just really sad to think about. I think it's sadder when we get to the part of actually interrogating what they intend to use this money for, and if we can trust them to actually use the money.
Exactly. So are you saying that you can't trust our current president to manage the affairs of our financial status now in Nigeria?
I mean, like, financial misappropriation has and remains a big issue within the Nigerian context. Like, it's we've talked about this since we were little. Corruption, misappropriation, all those things. So, like, I can't trust such a state. To and again, like, in preparation for this conversation, I actually did go and I searched everywhere to find out where the cybersecurity initiatives that they claim they want to implement with the funds are, and I couldn't find any documents from the states, like from the federal government, saying these are the list of cybersecurity initiatives that we want to implement. It's just a blanket statement of, oh, we want to strengthen our cybersecurity infrastructure.
I think should that be, whose responsibility is that? Is it the National Assembly?
So you want the Ministry of, like, Infotech, Comms, those federal parastatals that are responsible for all of those things to clearly articulate what you want to use the funding for, right? And it's been a problem even with the budgeting system in Nigeria, right? It's you just slap sums on education, say, oh, we're going to spend 4 billion on this. Like, we don't know what you're doing with it. We don't know, what the actual.
At least you're buying private jets,
I mean, that's what's the odds that they won't do that with whatever money there is. So it's.
I mean, it's been interesting. Let's dig deep into your field. I know you prefer a lot of digital solution to most of all these banks. And can you explain why there are, like, hidden charges on transactions? Is this something that your field or your department knows about? Is it a trick from your side? The bank pays you guys, okay, can you make this transaction hidden, and the customers don't see these charges on their phone? Or what do you generalize the charges on their phones? What do you generalize it as?
Okay, so it's a very controversial topic, right? And I think it can be as simple as just understanding the infrastructure of the banking sector in Nigeria, right? So it's for a transaction to be completed, there are different touch points through which that transaction has to go through before it can get fulfilled. So you have a sender A within a bank A who wants to send money to, you, for example, in bank B. Now, that ends when the chain of transaction, it has to go from the bank's own infrastructure to some payment gateway, right? So you probably heard of names like NIBS, and all of those settlement gateways, and then all the way then to the receiving institution. And the more technical terms for this, I don't intend to bore you with that. So across that chain of transaction, there are lots of costs, so cost of serve, right? So you can think about it in however we want to view it. Now, in developed markets, right, because you have economies of scale, right? So you have larger volumes of transactions. You are able to bring down those charges to almost nothing, to almost zero, right? You also have more developed infrastructure, which is not unstable. So you don't have to spend so much money on, maintenance and all of that. So a lot of those charges are almost zero to none in those markets, but also more importantly because markets like the UK, these banks already they've diversified how they generate revenue, right? So there's a lot more focus on credits, like your cards, mortgages, loans, or all of that. So you have a more diversified source of income. So they don't really need to charge you like hidden charges like banks in Nigeria have to quote unquote survive the cost of transactions. So it's it's a bit of a monster when you think about the fact that the immaturity of the infrastructure in Nigeria means that for banks to survive, they need to, manage their infrastructure in such a way that they have to charge you to fulfill transactions and onwards.
Now we come to cyber attacks on banks. What's their problem?
Okay, so it's a monster of a problem, right? Because like I always like to say this, I'm more a digital transformation consultant than I am a cybersecurity expert. But the usefulness of the conversation around digital transformation is that cybersecurity is a very critical component. Because the more you digitize, the more you expose yourself to the hazards of digitizing, right? So on the one hand, we are advocating that banks should do more, automate more, introduce more products, more channels, etc. But on the other hand, it also means that the banks are then exposing themselves to the risks of being hacked and all that. So the way I like to view cybersecurity in the context of digital transformation is as you accelerate change, how do you also accelerate security, right? And that it remains a big challenge in Nigeria. For example, when I still predominantly worked in that market, we had experts cybersecurity teams who used to do a number of things like in more technical terms like vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, where they come to a bank and assess your IT environment and try to find endpoints that are not secured or accesses that are not properly managed and all that. And you just realize that the security culture in Nigeria is so lax. I saw in the news one time, one bank in Nigeria had employees who had resigned, a couple years back, and they still had active accesses to the bank's environment, right? And it's as simple as proactively managing your Active Directory, right? It's as simple as your ID and authentication technology being up to date, right? So you view vulnerability from both an internal and external perspective. Yeah. So internally, you've heard stories of internal bank staffs sabotaging the bank, right? Trust. And that's where the culture of change has to start from inside out. And then externally, it's a broader beast. So you're talking about hackers, you're talking about, all your Yahoo boys, for example. Okay. And all that. There's some of them that target banks, Yeah. And that's they exploit those vulnerabilities, and banks in Nigeria are paying through their teeth. Yeah, there's a lot of undisclosure because they don't want to, create panic in the market. But yeah, the cybersecurity, the money's lost through cybersecurity attacks in Nigeria is very alarming.
Wow, I think a lot of people don't know that. I don't know that.
Yeah.
Everybody's just complaining about the fact that, they deduct some certain amount of money and transfer 100,000 naira to my neighbor, and then the neighbor can possibly wake up the next morning saying 99,999. The charges can be ridiculous sometimes when you already had hopes on the money, but then people are not really thinking about it from the perspective of the private organization of the banks in this instance, and what they're facing and how they are trying their best to, protect the bank from such cyber attacks. So my question now is, how can financial institutions balance the need for robust cybersecurity measures with the convenience of seamless digital banking experience?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a long list of things that they can do, right? I think it's just, if we want to simplify it, it's two things, right? First, there has to be a cultural change to security. And for example, in my organization, EY, we have this thing we do where, you just randomly get phishing emails, right? That are organized by the organization, and you're supposed to detect that it's a phishing email and report it, right? a friend of mine working in another organization in the UK fell victim of that phishing email, and he was mandated to do a compliance learning for like a month, right? So it's tightening the grip on the culture of security. So you understand that there's an internal lens to security and there's an external lens to security. So we can chat from now till tomorrow about all the ISOs and all the security standards and all the frameworks, and all that. But it comes to the people, right? It's the people that safeguard, the bank. And if interests are first of all not properly, put right, so you already have people within the bank who want to sabotage the bank. There's no way you can safeguard the bank, right? But then it's as you journey through your digital transformation agenda, which we are actively professing for banks in Nigeria. We want to see them, fully digitized, end-to-end, straight through processing, all that really fancy stuff. It's thinking about how you embed security in every part of that journey and just make sure that, end-to-end, you're safe.
Amazing. I mean, I think Nigerian government needs to hire you right now because I feel like you have a lot of things to offer. So if you are to change a system in this area that you're skilled at, and you want to change the system in Nigeria, considering your level of experience here in the UK, what particular thing what would that actually be? What would you like to change? Working there in Nigeria, seeing the flaws, seeing a lot of things that are happening. I understand that your organization is a multinational organization, but then there are still some stringent rules when it comes to policy implementation and all of that. That is quite different in different organization and different location, because obviously the environmental, social, and economic factor also influences whatever it is that you do in a particular country. So what do you think that particular thing would be if you were to change it back home in Nigeria? I know we're streaming from the UK, but we are patriots of Nigeria. We are really concerned about the situation in Nigeria, and we want to look at how possible it is for us to influence decisions, having learned from here, see what they do, and see how we can, incorporate it in our home country. So what do you think about what would that actually be? I'm interested actually.
Yeah, it's a really hard question because there's just so many problems back home, right? But I think within the context of like financial services and I think one big game changer, and it's something that the UK has now made very topical, is the idea of consumer duty, right? So consumer duty basically forces organizations to think about the impact of everything they do to the consumer, right? So the consumer is the primary focus. Like you'd almost view it as organizations are set up for profit, right? So that's their wiring. They want to think about everything they do to make profits and all that. And then now a POV is coming to say, no, right? Your primary focus should be on the consumer. So it's thinking about how your products impact the customers. Thinking about how much information you provide about the product that helps the customer know how to interact with that product, how they consume the product, and all of that. And I think if you import that idea into Nigeria, you'd realize that a lot of the way consumers are served in Nigeria is really abhorrent. Like it's almost like businesses in Nigeria don't really care about whether you are your experience is 100% in how they serve you, right? It's from as simple as you calling the customer service in Nigeria, and getting such terrible treatment, to wanting to onboard a product and not being able to find as much information about that product online, right? It's how you make an onboarding journey very seamless, right? I always like to, and not even, as an ambassador or anything, but like a Lab by Webman, for example, was one of the products that started off with, that end-to-end digital onboarding journey. And I talk about it a lot. And I remember back then in NYSC when we were, on camp, and I opened an account with them in like 15 minutes, something, and it felt like magic, right? And you think about how that primary focus on making life easy for the customer just really changes the game. And you look at Nigerians, and that's why we suffer in Nigeria, because no one cares about the average Nigerian. It's your governments are making policies, they're not thinking about how it impacts people on the ground. They're only thinking about their top end, right? You know, I think consumer duty
it's very important.
Can be a massive game changer. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, in addition to what you said, and on a lighter note, I feel like Nigerian government also needs to communicate better to their citizens. You can't just, throw a document in the air and expect everybody to understand what your plan is or what your thought is behind, making such policies.
Look, and that's consumer duty, right? Yeah. So, for example, I work in a product that in the UK that serves the aged market, right? I can't say a lot about it because of anything. But as part of consumer duty, it was understanding that because that market segment is an aged market segment, so you're like 50 and above, people who are not very tech savvy and all that, the regulator mandates you to be as meticulous in how you set up the product, how you think about how they interact with the product. It's even as simple as the brochures you send to the consumers that details everything they need to do. It's all the alternative channels that you make available for them. So if you can't use the mobile app, what other alternative channels are there? It's even to as little as the day in the week where you send the letters out to them. So the regulator is like, look, the best time to send out the mails are like on Thursdays, because you don't want to send it to them on Monday so they don't start their week anxious. By Thursday they can settle into the weekend, read your letter on Friday, Saturday, Sunday make an informed decision, call you back on Monday. It's as little as that.
Yeah. So basically one of the major things we need to do is to, you guys communicate to your citizens in a layman English. Let them understand the benefit of your actions. Let them understand the advantages and disadvantages of whatever policy. Please do not throw policies at us. Even if it favors us, we still need to, understand the perspective you're coming from. Not all of us are economists. Not all of us are skilled in, these particular topics, and we also want to be carried along with whatever it is our government are doing. So basically, this is just, in my opinion, to the Nigerian government. It's been so interesting having this conversation with you. I could go on and on because there are a lot of things coming to my head right now, but I'm sure you're going to leave our viewers in awe of the spark that you've brought to this show. Thank you so much for joining us, Nzube. I really do appreciate it, and I hope next time when we call on you, you would come through for us. Thank you so much, my amazing audience. I'm sure you've had a lot to learn today. You've seen a lot, you've heard a lot, and I hope we are able to practicalize some of these things by trying to do that startup you plan to do, go into that tech world, bring your own ideas, your opinions. It is very, very, very valuable. If you have any comments about this opinion of ours, you can just drop it in the comment section and we'll be right there engaging you accurately. I've got eyes everywhere, even on Twitter. And you need to follow us on all social media platforms so that you get updated anytime we drop any of our videos or, any sneak peeks. So until next time, keep exploring, keep shining, and keep learning. Bye.